In this lesson, we'll learn how to use the editing modes and tools in Pro Tools. For this, you want to go to File, Import Audio, and on the Resource Files folder, we'll import Perk Loop, click Add, and choose Done. Then you're going to get a dialog that's going to ask you if you want to assign this to a new track or just put it on the clip list, which is this right here on the right. Also, if you want this to start at the beginning. So with the default settings on, just click OK. Now let's get into some shortcuts. With a key focus on, which is this A through C, your shortcut key commands will work. The first one you want to learn is the letter R and the letter T. The letter T allows you to zoom in. The letter R allows you to zoom out. You can also resize this track by hovering your mouse where it shows double arrows. Click and drag, and it's going to resize the track. Or you can right click on this section and choose one of the presets. So you can go extreme and go large. And to zoom in again, R and T. There we go. So let's go back to the top of the song, which is going to be return or enter. And there it is. So there are 4 editing modes. And these are shuffle, spot, slip, grid. And if you click and hold this, you'll have relative grid. So the way that grid works is that grid locks your selection on the grid value, which is right here. So for example, if I change the grid value to quarter note, any selection I make is going to be locked to a quarter note value. I can change this to 1 bar. Likewise, any selection I make is going to be locked to 1 bar. Slip mode is the opposite. So this allows you to make a selection anywhere. It's not going to lock to anything. The spot is different. If I try to move this clip, it's going to ask me where do I want to move it on a timeline, whether that's bars and beats, minutes and seconds, or time code. And the spot dialog is mostly used for post-production, meaning when you're doing audio for film. So we'll click cancel. And then you have shuffle. So shuffle allows you to have your selection to be free, kind of like slip. But what happens if I zoom out, if I make a selection and I hit delete, it's going to fill in that gap. Let's go ahead and undo that. Edit, undo, clear. Let's change this to grid. Now if I hit delete, it's going to leave an empty space there. Let me undo again. If I make that cut using slip mode, it's going to behave the same way. So shuffle is primarily used when you're making cuts and you want to delete the empty space between. This comes in handy if you're editing long sessions of like a speech or a lecture or a voiceover and you want to fill in the gaps. Well, let's go ahead and undo that. Go back to grid. Here at the top you have your editing tools. And when you see this down arrow, that means that there are other options. So normal zoom or toggle zoom. So normal zoom changes the tool to zoom, so I can click and drag a selection. As soon as I let go, it's going to snap the view to that fit. Let's go ahead and zoom out using R. If I click and hold this and choose single zoom, let's say we are in our hand tool. If I click on this, it's going to temporarily put it into zoom tool, but it's going to snap back to the original tool. Then you have these options of trimming, standard, TCE, which is a time stretching algorithm, scrub, which allows you to audition the file, kind of like old school tapes, and loop, which comes in handy when we're working with instruments and MIDI tracks. And we'll get into that later. Then you have the selector tool, which is with what we've been using to make selections. We have the hand tool, which allows you to move the clips. If you click and hold the hand tool, you can choose separation or object. So let me make a selection first. Change this to separation. It separates that. Or object. Which pretty much works the same way. Change this back to time. Then you have the scrubber tool. And lastly, the pencil, which also has multiple functions. And this is going to be used for automation or drawing volume changes or effects changes. And we'll get into that later when we do instruments and audio. But if you notice around these three tools, there's a bracket, and that's called the Smart tool. And the reason that's called the Smart tool is because depending on where you hover your mouse, it's going to change to any one of those three. So to visualize this a little bit better, let me go ahead and increase the size of this. Let's also eliminate this clip and this clip. So we only have this clip to work with. We'll zoom in using T. There we go. So if you notice, there's a middle line right here that stretches from the left to the right. And if I hover my mouse over the middle line, then it becomes the selection tool. So I can make a selection. Let's go to slip mode to make this not locked to the grid. So I can make a selection. If I go below the line, it turns into a hand tool. So that means that I can move this around. If I hover over to the left side, it's going to turn into a trim tool, which allows me to trim that for both the left and the right, allowing me to trim the beginning and the end. And if I hover my mouse over to the corners, to the top right or top left, then it allows me to create a crossfade. Now all this is called non-destructive editing. That means that at any time I can undo my changes, or I can trim back to the original file. I can eliminate my fades by just deleting them. And I can restore my original data. So that's how the editing tools and editing modes work in Pro Tools.